Welcome back to Hilaal Live. Now, the United States of America has imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa for alleged corruption and human rights abuses. The order also affects other senior leaders in the country, blocking their assets in the US and barring them from unofficial travel there. The new sanctions replace a broader program that was introduced 2 decades ago. Joining us now to discuss this, I'd like to welcome the former Minister of Local Government and Public Works in Zimbabwe, Saviour Kasukuwere. Mr. Kasukuwere, good day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Kasukuwere, just your initial reaction to these fresh sanctions.
Well, I think it's a move in the right direction. We've always wanted, and this has been the position of SADC and other countries, that sanctions against the people of Zimbabwe and the government institutions be dropped. And I think the American government has finally done the correct thing.
Mr. Kasukuwere, Zimbabwe on a broader whole has been suffering with regards to these sanctions. These ones are different ones, aren't they? Because they are directed at the leadership, am I right?
Yeah, from my reading, I think these take a personal approach on the leadership, as opposed to the Zidera ones, which were part of the Biden Executive Authority, which he presented on yesterday. They basically ended up affecting the entire economy because of the implications on some of the state-owned institutions like ZDI, Zimbabwe Minerals Corporation, as well as Zimbabwe Mine Development Corporation. And I think their removal is a step in the right direction.
Mr. Kasukuwere, we had you here on Talking Point, obviously post the elections in Zimbabwe, and of course, you bemoaned that the elections were not free and fair. You said that there is an iron fist that's being ruled within Zimbabwe. Does this change now the approach of the leadership, or are we going to see more of the same with these sanctions being imposed?
Well, I think this is a time for Mnangagwa to do some self-introspection, a reflection on what type of a country Zimbabwe should be in terms of his legacy. What does he want to leave behind? In as much as I have issues with him at a personal level, at a political level, sanctions are sanctions. We must separate that and say we don't need people to tell us how to resolve our issues. However, the way Mnangagwa has been handling the issues of Zimbabwe, those of us who are outside the country are actually reeling from his own set of sanctions. That's why outside the country. So he needs to mature and provide leadership that will unite every citizen behind the pain and suffering our people are going through. There's much more that can be done to build our country than to remain dogged in fights, dogged in disunity. When poverty is on the doorstep, hunger is on the doorstep, we have a lot on our plate, and our plate is full. This is the time for leadership and wisdom to prevail. Call upon every Zimbabwean to come and participate in the building of our country and ensure that every citizen is a right in the country. Because he's not doing that, it is now giving those other people, the United States of America in this case, an excuse. And it becomes very hard for anybody to speak out against it, especially when you're a victim of his misrule.
The many rights groups, especially in Zimbabwe, many journalists in Zimbabwe have been, of course, complaining. They've been bemoaning that they have been suppressed. Freedom of media has been suppressed within Zimbabwe. Can this change? Can this sanctions now turn the screw in terms of giving there more media freedom within Zimbabwe, more activism within Zimbabwe? Can this be the sort of catalyst that the country needs, given that it's been years and years under the leadership of Mnangagwa, where this has really seen a heighten of the suppression?
Well, I would not want to jump in now and comment. I want to hear from the government, especially from Mnangagwa, his take. on the accusations that have been leveled against him. Are these genuine or they're not true? And let alone what is he going to do therefore differently so that we can all be able to rally behind one common objective as a people. And the onus really on the question you've raised is on Mnangagwa to respond.
Mr. Kasukuwere, SADC, we haven't heard anything from them as yet. We haven't heard anything from the president here in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa. But one would assume that SADC would be looking at this and maybe sitting in discussion and asking the question, what do we do now? Do we go ahead and back these sanctions, or do we take a different approach? As somebody who served in the previous cabinet of Zimbabwe under the late Robert Mugabe, what approach are you looking for from a SADC perspective?
Well, I think we need to pay tribute to the SADC leaders who have raised the issue of sanctions on a number of occasions and in a number of forums, including the setting aside of a special day, as recommended by the late president of Tanzania, who put forward a proposal to have a day where, I think it's 23rd of October, if I'm not mistaken, where the region basically comes together to discuss about the sanctions, the impact they've had on the people of Zimbabwe. I think that kind of push, which has also seen the AU take a position, has been very helpful in getting the United States of America to make this move and this decision. Really, like I've said, it comes at a good time when we're also expecting that our country will have a huge result. It will be in the interest of Zimbabwe to have that wherewithal to look after its people by sanctions going away. So the regional body obviously will react to this position. They are yet to respond, and I have not yet any other leaders respond, because the latest position by the Americans, you've got the State Department on one hand and the Treasury on one hand, all making decisions which on one hand, the Treasury has removed those who were sanctioned, but you also have the State Department invoking a piece of legislation from the Magnitsky law, which we are all yet to really understand the import of that. But from a preliminary point of view, basically just from looking at it as it is, the key institutions like the Mineral Marketing Corporation of Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe Mining Development Corporation of Zimbabwe, a lot of the banks are now off the book, meaning that there is a chance for industry and business to start moving forward, to start growing. But we will have to look at the comprehensive picture. What does it mean in the final analysis? But so far, I think the move is a welcome move because it lessens the pressure on businesses to interact with Zimbabwe. The Zimbabwe Defense Industries, which is a key national defense body, can now be able to procure, spares and so forth that they require for the defense force of our country. So those, I think, are some of the what I would call the silver lining on the cloud. We want to welcome that move, but also want to, at some point, introspect and say, okay, broadly, what does it mean? Hence, I've said it is essential for Mnangagwa to put on his leadership cap and start seeing that each and every citizen of Zimbabwe must be protected. But there can't be special citizens. The question of corruption, stealing, we've lost, I think, about $3 billion just early this year. This year to date, we've lost $3 billion. And who's stealing? Those who are responsible for corruption must account for what they are doing to the ordinary men and women by abusing our national resources.
Mr. Kasukuwere, I've got just 1.5 minutes. I need to get in this question. You spoke about introspection. You spoke about maybe this could be the turning of the tide, hopefully from a Zimbabwean perspective. You as a former cabinet minister, of course, are not in Zimbabwe anymore because you're not being favored in this current cabinet of Zimbabwe. If President Mnangagwa were to put an olive tree and say, we want to redevelop Zimbabwe, we want to rebuild Zimbabwe, we need expertise, we need former cabinet ministers like yourself, Mr. Kasukuwere, to return and rebuild Zimbabwe, to lift these sanctions. Is that something that you may be interested in?
We are interested in moving the national agenda forward. And if it is a genuine call by somebody who has understood the implications of the negative energy has generated over the years, it will be a very, very good step, a step in the right direction. And all right thinking in Zimbabwe will rally around a national consensus that redefines, rebuilds, and strengthens our country.
Mr. Kasukuwere, thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
That's Saviour Kasukuwere. He was a former minister in Zimbabwe for local government and public works. Do stay tuned first. We're going to be having Isha Salah from Makatul Mukarrama, and after that, I'll have your latest in news, finance, and sports. Do stay tuned.